Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight is the Analects. We'll be covering book 4, verses chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10. Go ahead and type exclamation point if you'd like to read your version. I would like to see James or Penny, would you mind reading?
No.
Oh, great.
Fine. Should I start out?
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm reading the James Legge version. So book 4, verse, or well, they call it chapter 7. The master said, the faults of men are characteristic of the class to which they belong. By observing a man's faults, it may be known that he is virtuous. Chapter 8. The master said, if a man in the morning hear the right way, he may die in the evening without regret. Chapter 9. The master said, a scholar whose mind is set on truth and who is ashamed of bad clothes and bad food is not fit to be discoursed with. Chapter 10. The master said, the superior man in the world does not set his mind either for anything or against anything. What is right, he will follow.
Thank you, honey. James, do you have a different version, or is that?
No, it's the same one. Very nice reading, Penny. Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
Would anybody else like to read their version of chapters 7, 8, 9, and 10, book 4? Aman.
I just got so used to having 2 readings, I figured I should offer up a second reading.
It's very much welcomed. Me too, actually. So thank you.
And if memory serves, this is the DC Lao, if I'm not mistaken. Book 4, verse 7. The master said, in his errors, a man is true to type. Observe the errors, and you will know the man. Verse 8, the master said, he has not lived in vain who dies the day he is told about the way. Verse 9, the master said, there is no point in seeking the views of a gentleman who, though he sets his heart on the way, is ashamed of poor food and poor clothing. Chapter 10, verse 10. The master said, in his dealings with the world, the gentleman is not invariably for or against anything. He is on the side of what is moral.
Thank you, Aman. Very much appreciate that. Stepping up and giving us a second reading there. Jason, would you like to go ahead and share your version?
Hold on. Did you see the screen or it's messed up?
Let me see. I see. I see. That looks like chapter. That looks like book 5. You're on there.
Is your book 5?
You're on book 5. Yeah.
Hold on, no.
You want to go to book 4?
Because I use the time to work on book 5. So.
Oh, so you're an overachiever. You went ahead.
Hold on. I don't know how come it gets messed up. Okay, just one more time. Okay, sorry.
No problem. Take your time.
Yeah, should be this one. No, you see my private message?
Yeah, I actually took a screenshot while it was up. So.
Where is it? It should be this one. Okay, so let me try to fix this one. Sorry about this.
No worries.
Okay, this one should be fine, right? But it's in chapter 5. So let me go back to book 4. We are on 10. Okay.
4.7,
7,
7,
8,
7,
9,
7, 8, 9. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So here's the right thing, right? So, okay. The master said, people make different kinds of mistakes. by observing one's mistake, you can know his distance from 人. Okay. So here I just kind of insert the word for the distant, right? So try to make it logically make sense, right? Because you categorize what kind of mistake people make, then you know how far away this person from 人. So that's the advice Confucius give people. So I think that will make more sense instead of say, see your mistake, then I know what's 人 about him. So I think that's a little bit words I insert for Confucius. Chapter 8, the master said, if I hear the Tao in the morning, I can die without regret in the evening. So here, I'm not sure we should use the capital Tao or the lowercase Tao. Okay, so the capital Tao means the one in the Tao Te Ching talking about the highest way, right? Or in Confucius may talk about the Tao, the way to be a virtue, the way to be something. So here I tend to believe he's talking about the highest Tao. So it's a rhetorical statement because he said, if I know this one, I die without regret. Just like Buddhism saying, like lay down butcher's knife and you will become a Buddha on the spot, something like this. So I think that's we should read rhetorical, right? Chapter 9. I think that's the first time show this word, okay? And some translation called gentleman. And the translation should be 士, okay? And then I translate as a learned person. So if you think about this 士 is different than 君子. So if you think about the ranking, I think the audience in all the Confucius disciple, they are not 君子 yet, because 君子 is a high standard. Confucius want his student or everyone to become. So you can assume if you are listen to Confucius teaching, you assume you are 士, which is learned person. Okay, you are not like a farmer. I'm not saying they are not learned. I'm saying if you have ambition to be the working for the government, so you are 士, okay, the learned person. And then you have two ways to go, right? If you follow doing the moral thing, doing the right thing, you will become 君子. That's what you want to do. The other way you can do is become a small man. Okay, so that's the two way to go. So that's the first time it show. I think that's the first time in etiquette show. It's a 士, which is learned person, and some translation translate as gentleman. I think that's the right word to translate as gentleman. But unfortunately, 君子 also being translated as gentleman also. So that's why I want to make it clear, you know. So 士, 君子, and the small man. Okay, that's the three level. And the 士 is kind of neutral, right? You will, if you have ambition to work for government, then you are 士. Then you can be good. Then you become 君子. If you don't do good, you become small man. That's so here. Confucius said, the master said, if a learned person, which is 士, set his mind on the Tao, but is ashamed of poor clothes and the poor food, he is not worth discussing with. So he's talking about if a 士 want to set on his mind on the Tao, which is want to become 君子, but he is ashamed of his poor clothes, poor food, that's not the person you want to deal with. Okay, so he set a high bar for the people who want to become a 君子. Chapter 10, the master said, a 君子, so here it used the 君子, that means a high standard, okay, not 士. Okay, the master said, a 君子stands toward toward the world is that he doesn't set his mind against anything, nor for anything. He will follow what is righteousness. So here is another word called be. Okay, so the translation says he will follow what is righteous. And if you remember on the book 2:14, Confucius used the same word, be, to talk about a small man is partisan. Okay, so the small man is partisan, but here partisan means you gather together. So a small man will all gather together to, they are buyers, they want to compete, so they all gather together. But here Confucius used the same word, but in a different meaning, because you are partisan with righteousness, with your duty. So in this sense, it's good. So here talking about if Junzi has a stance toward this word, and he doesn't against anything or for everything. He's not like say no to something or say yes to something. He only stick with righteousness. That's what he try to express in this chapter. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Aman, would you like to make any comments?
Just a couple. I, again, really enjoyed Jason's translation, and I enjoy working on it with him. As far as this subtle distinction of Dao, I think it's nitpicky, but it is important, because there are times where, as Jason points out, Confucius is talking about sort of the grand scheme of things, the grand Dao, the Dao that we were more introduced to in the Tao Te Ching. And at other times he talks about an individual's Dao or a father's Dao. And there it's being much more specific about sort of a particular way or a particular path. So I do think that that choice of capitalizing, not capitalizing, will indicate to some degree what sort of context it's being used in. As far as the shi go, I like the term learned person. In fact, I liked it so much, I just kind of skipped over it as I was doing the edit, because I was like, oh yeah, that's what shi means. But Jason's right to point out that it often does get mistranslated or translated more sort of wrapped in universally with something like the gentleman. And it is something distinct. It's beyond just Confucian. It's sort of a pan-Chinese concept of a literate class of learned men who we might, in a very antiquated sort of English term, say man of letters, that distinguishes that person from someone who takes those lessons, takes that learning, and makes a moral character of himself, which is more what he means when he speaks of the junzi, as opposed to just simply the shi. So the shi can be, yeah, neutral. It's someone who has gotten the degree, but have they gotten the degree and become a small man, or have they gotten the degree and become a great man, or working towards it? And that brings us down to verse 10, where this term bi is used again here in that sort of positive light. So I think this is one of those ideas where if your character is right to start with, then you'll gravitate towards the correct thing, what is righteous. If all you care about is being in with the quote unquote right crowd, then you're missing the forest for the trees. You're simply trying to gain, curry favor, gain popularity, gain fame, which is why the idea of this as a small man, as opposed to somebody who does this because their character has been set right in the first place, are distinctive.
Thank you very much, Aman. Wonderful comments as always. Folks, go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat to talk about this particular chapter or any takeaways that you had from these verses. It does seem to be, at least book 4 is definitely returning to more of a theme of virtue versus what we saw in book 3, which was actually more about ritual. But James, please.
Yeah, these are kind of like a little short and pithy. I guess I like I like them all. I think number 8 is nice because it talks about. I think about this when I listen to music like Beethoven Andante, like the 3rd Symphony or the 9th Symphony. Something, I'm not sure if those are the titles, but the slow movements where he kind of stretches out, finds profound movements, and moves on from the profound to the colloquial. It's just such a beautiful artistic vision that he had. And so I think those would be good moments to die. Like if I were dying, I'd want to run to the stereo set and put on some Beethoven. And I've seen that in other people, like my son. I remember when we were listening to the radio in the car, and my son just got transfixed because of a choral orchestra with chorus type of thing, where just all the music was there at once, and he realized how great music was in that moment. He was like, I think he was 5 years old at the time. Yeah. So that's the kind of like thing I think that Confucius is talking about there. And the bad clothes, bad food thing is kind of, I think it's you have someone that is extremely able to reason and to I don't know, I someone who is distinguished, let's put it that way. Maybe this is it sounds to me like the language is maybe a little, I'm not sure if I listen carefully to Jason's translation. Yeah, but if this is about a guy who is like a learned person, and then but he only cares about faults. Well, it's kind of like, or he only cares about clothes and food, then it's kind of like a clue that this is not someone who's an interesting person to have a discussion with. This is somebody who is fixated on inferior things, even though he might be a learned man. Then I guess number 10 is really deep. That's the guy who, if you're a sartorial, if you're for something or against something, like your opinion counts, that type of person, that doesn't mean you're necessarily righteous. So Confucius is saying, don't have an opinion on everything. Don't be for things or against things. Just follow what is right. And your opinion will be fine, because you'll usually, your actions will speak for you. So that's my attitude about number 10. And then number 11. Is that one of them?
We're still going
No.
to. Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll come
you're
to
right.
11 in a minute.
Yeah, so that's it. I went through them, and that is an interesting bunch of expressions, because there's this inherent logic in so many of his sayings. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, James. It's very rewarding, to hear your explanation, to me at least. Thank you very much. And I realized one thing. I think the words I translate as righteousness, actually they have the double meaning. In most of time, and in this one, probably means duty. Okay, so right, when Confucius used righteousness, you should consider as a duty in another way, something you must do.
All right. Yeah, I was just thinking of righteousness as a universal value. So in other words, it's the infinite or the universal that sort of stands out there. Nicole has something. I think she was waving.
I was just saying hello.
Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you.
So what I'm actually going to go ahead and there's actually a chapter in a one of the verses that one of my online verses that I had actually just been reading about some of the interpretations, specifically of 4.8, when it talks about the Tao. The way is what is employed in order to save the people. The sage preserves his self in order to put the way into practice. The point is to save the people with the way, not to save oneself with the way. This is why we read that if the way were genuinely heard by the world in the morning, even if one died that evening, it would be all right. Confucius is pained that the way is not being put into practice, and moreover makes it clear that he is more concerned about the world than his own self. So I don't know if anybody has any comments on that particular interpretation, but Aman, go right ahead.
I would say that, yeah, here I agree. It is a more grandiose way than necessarily his way, but it is still polemic in that how he understands the way is through a very absolutist sort of means. If everyone does what is expected of them, then harmony will ensue. It's almost a way by will, a will to way, if I can Nietzscheify Confucius. Whereas the way of the Tao Te Ching is as things are, without the orchestration of order or harmony. And so there are polemic elements in how each of those two authors use this similar term. And that's why I brought it up long ago, that it's sort of like using a term in modern English, justice or freedom or liberty. It does mean one thing, but depending on who's saying it, what it connotes can be very, very different. But that is different than in later chapters, well, where he will speak of someone's Tao or a particular person's Tao, which is not as grandiose. Then it is much more narrowed down to that individual's particular way of being or path in life. As long as I got the floor one more moment, something James said actually made me think of a story from my mother. You were talking about chapter 9 and the shi who sets his mind on the Tao but is ashamed of poor clothes or poor food. My grandfather worked as a theater manager before he became a plumber later in life. He retired as a plumber. When my mother got her first office job, he pulled her aside at one point and said, "You're not just getting this job so you can dress up for work, right?" Because to his mind, there was a certain type of person, I guess, from that era for whom there was nothing more important than getting to be dressed up for work, showing off that you were a big man, not necessarily actually contributing anything or even necessarily providing well. He made a lot more money as a plumber than he did as a theater manager. And he always viewed, I think, with some suspicion, anyone who had to hew to a dress code or, go in their three-piece suit as they're just doing this to look important, not necessarily because they really get it. And I think that's some of the sentiment here, where a Shi who supposedly has their mind set on the Tao, but they can't abide doing, the rough-hewn clothes and eating ramen to actually go after what's really important. That they are someone who is not worth taking the time to really have any sort of discussion with.
That's an interesting point when that was read a little bit earlier, because and I just thought about this, Confucius is so focused on ritual. So that if you break this ritual and all of a sudden that you're not, you're showing some form of disrespect. So by, dressing the way, I guess by worrying about clothes in a way, there's some ritual to that, right? That your appropriate attire is to be worn to certain events. That's just something that I thought about, but there's another interesting aspect of it, and just this is my own personal take on it as well, is that while dressing up to impress other people or to show off is absolutely something that is where you're looking at something externally and you're putting a value on that, and you're almost trying to make other people feel inferior, which I would think is obviously not virtuous. But there's a flip side to this as well. Sometimes when people dress up, they dress up out of respect for the other individual. So there's somebody I know that would never wear a suit or never wear a jacket and tie, and they were going to a art exhibit, and an art exhibit, and where actually it was a woman he was dating. It was very important to her. And he just said, I never wear a suit and tie. And she says, well, would really appreciate it if you'd wear it for this event. So dressing up in that particular instance for someone else, I actually think that there is some virtue in that. That's just a thought anyway. I know it's random.
I personally agree. I also wanted to add one more dimension to it, that this isn't necessarily someone ashamed of poor food and poor clothes of and for themselves. It
What is
could
there
also
to be
indicate.
ashamed of?
Sorry,
I'm
say
sorry.
again?
I'm sorry. No, that's okay.
It could also indicate not being willing to talk to another because they don't present well enough, and that would have been more common for Confucius's class at that point in time, and he was considered something of a rebel for taking all comers from all stations in life, regardless of their appearance, if they were actually somebody who was sincerely interested in learning. I'm going to shut up. I'm curious what Nicole had to say.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what is there possibly to be ashamed of? The human body?
Oh, well,
I mean, is that
well,
shameful?
in this particular instance, it's a tad different. It's actually just saying that someone is
A low class? Like
is
a low
worried.
class?
No, that is more worried about clothes than they are
Oh,
about the
poor.
actual. So it's a little bit different. So Kevin, actually,
I'm sorry.
it's okay. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, just follow that part about the clothing or food. Yeah, I would consider it's about your virtual spiritual experience versus material experience. Generally, we, for example, from kids to graduated, we look for job for surviving. It's buy food, buy clothing. Never think about we can, consume on a spiritual. That's what here seeing is making me think what we practice today is so far from here. Is this past doesn't make sense to us since we innovation is kind updated. It's so old. It's not applied today or still have value. If have value, why we ignore it? We just live far, far away. We embrace material world. Even 4.8, you see, if what makes you happy is real about you, learn a Tao. Something you get it, like, oh, the whole moment that in your life to today, okay, something I didn't experience, but like to now, I think about it this way, we share each other thought. So, and also it's, yeah, it's I'm gonna follow other this whole book is book 4 is great. Yeah, I'm going to follow later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. So I have Brian and Penny, then Jason, and then Madeline. But by about the next 5 minutes, I want to move on to the next segment so we can kind of keep pushing through.
I just wanted to say, about the chapter 10, that at first I thought, well, gee, it's really strange that like a gentleman or something would not perhaps have an opinion about things and being trying to work for them. But then thinking about it, I thought more in the sense that a lot of times if people adopt an attitude towards something, they're for it or against it, then they no longer examine situations. They don't try to get additional knowledge about what's going on because they've already made an opinion about that. And so any situation that comes, that's the way they deal with it. So then I thought, well, that to me, it seems like perhaps that was he was getting at, that if a person is going to do the right thing, you always have to kind of be examining the situation and thinking a little bit about what would be the right behavior rather than just using something that you've adopted in the past and you're forging ahead and acting according to that.
Yeah, I agree with that. The idea that you're using your reason to come to some conclusion as opposed to just relying on some dogma, some belief. But Jason, then followed by Madeline.
I think Joe make a good point on the compared to the person want to dress up and the shame of poor clothes. I think that's very subjective. But the key Confucius point is here. His concern is if you feel shame of your clothes and the food, he meant your lower material world, right? You don't get enough material a reward. Okay, that's your concern. That's his reject. But about dress up, in Confucius' concern is more on whether or not you do it accordingly, which is custom or ritual, right? So if you go to the board meeting, if you wear jeans or wear short sandals, it's not according to Li because you should dress, formally. But if you go to, let's say, concert or just a casual beach party, then you wear full suit. Or sometimes even you try to impress and over-impress. When, for example, you want to see your primary school teacher, and right now you are being very successful. You should kind of dress down or don't drive your fancy car, drive your low-end car to visit your teacher. This kind of settlement Confucius is mentioned. That's what I learned from this kind of teaching.
Thank you, Jason. Madeline.
Yes, thanks, Joe and Jason and Aman. As I recall, Confucius looked back to a golden age. I think it was the Duke of Zhou. And I'm wondering if overall, if he thought that people in the place and time then were better people and adhered to this. In other words, they didn't look down upon the poor and they dressed appropriately for the occasion. Or is that anywhere in the Analects?
I'll defer to Jason or Amon on this one. Go ahead, Amon. Or I'm sorry.
I was just going to say that there's definitely a tone to the Analects of a lament of the decadence of the ages. Confucius absolutely saw the Duke of Zhou as sort of the penultimate junsa. This was about as good as somebody could have been. Maybe only the Sage Kings would have, been higher in his estimation, but that was considered outside the realm of human attainment. It was obtainable for somebody to be good, as good as the Duke of Zhou. And it certainly was a nostalgia of a bygone era that he saw going into decline. And it wasn't just him who saw it and going into decline. It was in reality going into decline in a number of ways. I don't know that he thought people were inherently better. I think he believed they were led better, and that people still had that capacity within them. They were just being misled in the time.
Thank you for that, Amon. Jason, you also had.
Oh yeah, I think Amon said wonderful. I'm surprised. That's exactly what I want to say.
I'm no longer surprised by Amon's
You read
ability
my
to
mind.
articulate something
I read
beautifully,
his mind. I don't
especially
know.
during the analytics. It's been spectacular. If there aren't any other comments, then we can go ahead and Brian, do you want to say something? I see you leaning over to, I don't know if you're going to put exclamation point there.
Oh, well, yeah, I was going to say, but you wanted to go on. It goes really to the 10th verse that people have been focused on. I'm not sure I have a lot to add, but I remember learning somewhere, and I think I learned either from Jason or Amon in an earlier context, that this idea that was translated righteousness by Jason somehow means squared, properly squared. I may be wrong about that, but I'll tell you, that's the idea that I carry now into my understanding of righteousness, in that it's, and the reason I've kind of started thinking along those lines is because James, talked about what he meant by righteousness, and then I kind of triggered what I thought about it. I guess I see it as being aligned, that if a person's righteous, all of their dealings are aligned with some ultimate, some ultimate standard that is articulated and often generally accepted. So that all their roles in life, as in the family, in the community, and work, all of that is aligned with this overriding goal, and their reasoning is also aligned with, or can be expressed in accordance with that goal. To me, it's interesting though that if you say, people don't usually say that about themselves. Other people say that about people. People don't say I'm righteous,
right?
But other people might say that about them, and that's just something I find interesting.
Thank you. I think you make a very good point. That's
Yes.
why what I meant, the righteous has two meanings, right? So when I don't say myself is righteous because I do my duty, but you see I do my duty, you will say Jason is righteous man. So I think that's the way to look at this word.
Great comments,
I'll
everyone.
finish the thought.
Please.
On that. Usually you say the other person is righteous if their ultimate goals agree with yours, but if their ultimate goals don't agree with yours, you don't say that they're righteous.
That's true.
That probably is the American way, not Confucius way.
Well said. So as long as there are no other comments, then we'll.
May I add something to that if you don't mind?
No, please do, Mike. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is my first time. It's
Welcome.
very, very interesting. I'm happy listening. So isn't righteousness though defined by the morality of the day? And I think if you were to think about Confucius and some of his writings, and if you were to say, well, if I follow most of the things that he laid out from a virtuous and moral perspective, you would say being righteous, it's not a subjective thing, but it's objective, and that's the reason why it is difficult for you to look at someone's actions and describe that as righteous without that person meeting some very varying standard as it relates to being virtuous or having some sense of morality. I think what I'm hearing is that righteousness can be defined by anyone based on their own standards, but I don't believe that. I believe that's too subjective, and there needs to be some objectivity to it. Otherwise, we're all righteous.
Let me
Go ahead.
respond to-
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I mean, especially the way my version is written. But go ahead, please, Jason.
No. I think that of course that's the legitimate question, but probably that's not Confucius' concern. Okay, his concern is he probably assume everybody know what's righteous. That obvious thing. Okay, so he probably not concerned about what's the contents of that. Just like all the moral philosopher, it's difficult to list like 10 must do as a righteous, but they just say you need to be righteous. But at least for Confucius, didn't put the content of righteous. At least that's my understanding.
Thank you for that, Mike. So do you have any additional comments, Mike, that you would like to add?
No. It's obviously my first time here, and typically in situations like this, I really want to absorb what's going on and try not to speak too much. There are some very intelligent people here, so I would like to listen.
Feel free to speak up anytime. Just type exclamation point in the chat. That's the way we generally indicate and go in order. So welcome. So I'll ask Penny or James, either one of you would like to read 11, 12, 13, chapters 11, 12, 13, and 14. And Amana, if you wouldn't mind reading your version as well, if you're okay with that.
Go ahead. Number 11, the master said, the superior man thinks of virtue. The small man thinks of comfort. The superior man thinks of the sanctions of law. The small man thinks of favors which he may receive. Number 12, the master said, he who acts with a constant view to his own advantage will be much murmured against. Number 13, the master said, if a prince is able to govern his kingdom with a complacence proper to the rules of propriety, what difficulty will he have? If he cannot govern it with that complacence, what has he to do with the rules of propriety? Number 14. The master said, a man should say, I am not concerned that I have no place. I am concerned how I may fit myself for one. I am not concerned that I am not known. I seek to be worthy to be known. Thanks.
Thank you very much, James. Amon, would you mind, or if?
Happy to.
No, thank you. Thank you.
DC Lao, chapter 11. The master said, while the gentleman cherishes benign rule, the small man cherishes his native land. While the gentleman cherishes a respect for the law, the small man cherishes generous treatment. Number 12. The master said, if one is guided by profit in one's actions, one will incur much ill will. 13. The master said, if a man is able to govern a state by observing the rights and showing deference, what difficulties will he have in public life? If he is unable to govern a state by observing the rights and showing deference, what good are the rights to him? And 14, correct?
That's correct. Yes, please.
The master said, do not worry because you have no official position. Worry about your qualifications. Do not worry because no one appreciates your abilities. Seek to be worthy of appreciation.
Thank you so much, Amon.
And editorial, Mike, we're not all that smart. Some of us are just really chatty.
I beg to differ, but anyway, we can sort that out some other time. So Jason, would you like to go ahead and save or share, save?
Okay, so chapter 11. Here's a word called tu. Okay, that's why some translation call it the comfort and some call land. Okay, that means the earth, the ground. So the translation is, the master said, a Junzi think of his virtue, but a small man think of his property. Okay, so that's the word tu, or means the earth, the ground. So I tend to translate it directly as his land, okay, his property. Again, a Junzi thinks of the sanction of law. I think another translation called think of the respect of the law. I think that probably make more sense than sanction. So a Junzi think of respect of law, but a small man think of the profit from the society. So one thing I'd like to point out is you probably will see a lot from now on. Confucius like to say, Junzi doing this, small man do this, Junzi do this, small man do this. So that's the way he's teaching. So I just kind of do some search. There's a lot. So I think this one is the first one. Start to do Junzi doing something, small man doing something. So that's chapter 11. 12, 13, and 14. When I listened to different translation, I realized most of the Chinese ancient text, there's no subject in the sentence. There's no subject. Chapter 11, we talk, the subject is Junzi or small man. That's good. We have a subject. But most of them have no subject. And so I have to translate, I have to insert the subject. But the difficulty in chapter 4 is no dialogue, right? So it's all Confucius monologue. So we don't know what's the subject. So again, this one has no subject. So usually we will use the one, okay? Somebody, a person, okay? So just pay attention on this. So chapter 14, the master said, if one allows oneself to pursue profit from one's behavior, there will be many complaints from others. So I think the teaching is easy because if you are guided, your behavior is guided by profit, okay, utilitarian, you will receive a lot of complaint. I like to focus is the word complaint. Chinese called yuan. This word has been used in the entire Analects 20 times, more than 20 times. So that means we need to know Confucius not only teaching the virtual behavior, he also tell people how to behave to avoid complaint from others. Okay, so if you pay attention, you will see a lot of things. Confucius' teaching is that's the way to avoid complaint from other people. So that's chapter 12. Chapter 13. Again, there's no subject. And then I use the one, but I think this one is talking to the prince. So I heard James, the translation, use the prince. I think that's a good one. So I'm going to use the prince. The master said, if a prince can actually practice Li to govern a state, why is it difficult? If a prince cannot practice Li to govern a state, what use is Li to them? Okay, so again, here the word called Li Rang, and so some translation call it richer and yield or something, but I think here means practice Li. Okay, just like in I think it's in book 3. If you remember, Confucius talk about the gentleman, the Junzi has no competition. Only competition is doing the archery competition. So you will do yield and and the drink, right? So here he's talking about the same word. He's talking about practice Li. He's talking about a prince need to practice Li so you can govern a state. Chapter 14. Okay. So here again, there's no subject. So instead of use the one, I use I, because I believe Confucius is talking about himself. Okay. The master said, I'm not concerned that I have no position. I'm concerned about my ability to stand on my position. I'm not concerned that my ability is not recognized. I seek to be worthy to be recognized. So the original text has no I, but you can put a one as a general advice. But I think here Confucius is talking about himself or kind of marking himself. If you remember, on the very first book 1, chapter 1, Confucius is talking about he's happy, even nobody recognizes his ability. Okay, he happy, he has a chance to practice what he learned, even he didn't get a position. So that's, I believe, Confucius is talking about himself. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. Just a really quick question. We in one of your Asian philosophies meetups, we covered somebody that also spoke against profit, and was it mentions?
Against the profit?
Yeah, yes. How it perverts everybody. And
I just want to, I want to mention this one. I'm glad that you talk about this, because on the previous, we talk about the righteousness, right? Confucius not talk too much about the righteousness, but in Mencius, he talk about compare righteousness and the profit. So very famous on the opening book of Mencius. Mencius, at that time, he was 70 years old. He visited King Hui of Liang. Okay, that's a rising local powerful king. Okay, so the king was happy. He said, "Hey, old man, come here. Do you bring any profit for my country?" Right. So Mencius answered, "Your Majesty, Okay, sir, why you talk about profit? Why don't you talk about righteousness? Then he start to his teaching. Okay,
Right.
if the king talk about profit, your minister will talk about profit, and the people working for the minister will talk about the profit, and all the people under your state will talk about profit. So whole state are looking for profit. They compete. So if you talk about righteousness, your minister will talk about righteousness. The people working for the minister will talk about righteousness, and all the people in the state will talk about righteousness. So why don't you talk about this? Yeah, sounds, not practical, but that's Mencius' teaching. And Mencius put a lot on the righteousness and the profit. Okay.
Yeah,
And in the chapter 16, there's more detail. Confucius talk about profit. And the priests don't think about profit as like compete to make more money. It's more like utilitarian thinking, I think. That's my understanding.
oh, that's very interesting. So thank you for that. I apologize, Mon. Go ahead.
No, I was happy to take a walk down Mencius Road, because Mencius really is to Confucius, and this is a terrible parallel, but he is to Confucius what Plato would have been to Socrates, probably his biggest promoter. In fact, we might not even know who Confucius was, but for some of the figures like Xunzi and Mencius, who really were mouthpieces. And that famous story of Mencius, showing up to a job interview and saying, "That's a terrible question to ask me right off the bat. You should ask me this, because this is better." Kind of talks to this very strident way in which Confucians took these lessons on board and saw them as way of life. Jason's right in that there's often no subject in the traditional Chinese, and this feels much more comfortable than some of the dialogues of book 3, because they're very didactic. They're very just to the point. If you kind of strip it out of subject and just imagine a moment where the master said, "Pursue profit, there's going to be complaints." It could have been that simple. It really could be just that simple, speaking to someone else. But in a terse, response like that, somebody went, "Oh, there's a depth of lesson there. Everything he taught us was just encapsulated in that one little chide that he just probably handed to Zaiwa, because he always picks on Zaiwa."
Right.
And so they wrote it down, and they wrote it down so that it would hopefully communicate the same sort of aha they got from having his lesson. It's always important to remember these are class notes from the classroom, and they are compiled by everybody, and they were literally everything that the master said that was thought worth writing down. And it didn't have to be, flowery or well thought out. It could be reflexive and reactionary. And that's where we get some of the contradictoriness in the specifics, but the theme remains the same. The idea or the motives that sort of guide the lessons, they remain the same, even though they're being spoken and taught to different students in different ways. Yeah, I won't go one by one through each of these chapters, but I invite you to imagine these as, somewhat throwaway from Confucius at times, and yet profoundly impactful to the students who heard them, because they saw in these something that was resonant of all of his wisdom.
Thank you, Amon. Would anybody else like to get to comment now what they've taken away from these chapters? Go ahead and type exclamation point in the chat. So I see, okay, I'll have James followed by
Alina?
Yeah, I'll have James, Elena, and then Brian, and then Kevin.
Okay, yeah, I just have general comments on this this section. I find that these are really illustrative of what I see as Confucius's intention to portray life as reciprocal. That he understands that I think it's number perhaps number 11, yeah, where you have sanctions and the small man
Yes.
and so forth. So there's this idea of reciprocity in Confucius's sayings. You know, if you are really base, if you don't really have virtue, if you really don't really follow virtue, there's always the alligators below you. So you know, just be concerned about reciprocity. That's kind of like an underlying message. I just meant that for partly for Mike, because of this idea of absolute righteousness. I think he's something along those lines. The idea that righteousness could be wrong. Well, yes, righteousness could be wrong, but actual existence is reciprocal. And so when Confucius is talking about about being righteous and doing your duty and following virtue, it's always kind of like there's consequences to actions. So just and this is a more practical side of virtue philosophy than the Western style. Instead of like saying this is good, always do this, that is good, always do that, that's bad, avoid it, you know, and so forth. With Confucius, it's well, these things are good, those things are bad, but always be aware of the crocodiles. You could lose your job, you could be considered less by other people. They could have a bad opinion of you, you know, like just as I do. So that's basically the kind of the pattern in Confucius is just be aware of your effects on others. Thanks.
I like that, James. Thank you very much for that. So next up, I have Elena, or iPhone.
Hi, did you say Elena or iPhone?
Yes, so usually we have a
Oh,
participant
okay.
that's her name, and she joins by her iPhone. So forgive me if that's not your name.
No worries. Hi, my name is Mary.
Mary, okay.
I may be stating the obvious, but I just I didn't read the material, and just upon listening to those chapters being read, I'm just struck by the strong similarities to the stories in the Bible. That's basically what I wanted to say. I don't know if that's being too obvious, but that's what I noticed. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. So next up we have Brian. I know Kevin was next in the queue, but I know Brian was waving his hand first. So I'm not skipping you, Kevin. Brian, go ahead.
This issue of righteousness seems to have cropped up again with Mencius in his initial interview. And again, I think in these verses here, I contrast the righteousness of doing let's see where it says here, doing the right thing earlier. Which one was that? Chapter 10. And then again, now he's talking in 12. That really struck me. He said, he who acts with a constant view towards his own advantage will be much murmured against, or as Jason translated, will be complained about. So I guess acting in your own interest is not righteous. And with a constant view to his own advantage, that's not righteousness. And the other thing that's probably not righteousness is, again, based on what I've heard, is from the prince's perspective, from the governing perspective, is utilitarianism is not righteous. Is not righteousness, or acting in accordance with utilitarianism is not righteousness. The what could be righteousness is the being concerned about the law. And that, I guess that, I mean, I don't think this puts the end to the discussion, and it's obviously a big topic. I will flag there's a difference now between a relationship also between virtue and righteousness. I've heard these words used somewhat interchangeably. I'm not sure they're the same. And the righteousness that I think is being referenced here, and really I'm saying this as a question to kind of encourage a response. It seems to me that the righteousness that we're talking about here is someone who acts consistently. So there's a consistency in the action, just like the person says here, the person who acts with a constant view to his own advantage. Somebody who acts with a constant view to the law or the sanctions of law is one who is righteous. And I think that may not rise to the level of being virtuous. And that raises, I mean, it just raises a ton of questions. But one question is whether there is any order or are any principles or rules that should govern the law, or can we just rely on what the law is, or I think it's Jason used the word supreme law. I'm not sure, but what the law is. But that to me is what makes sense of. I see that more as the righteousness is complying with the law as understood. So we get the consensus, and then that's some kind of objective norm for judging righteousness. It's also you comply with the law in all of aspects of your life. So you're very consistent and constant with your focus on the law rather than your profit. And finally, I think that you can explain yourself in terms of the principle you're following, the consistency that you're following. And in order to do that without raising a lot of arguments, is you're focusing on some agreed standard, and that tends to be the law. So I think that this righteousness, however it's defined, I think needs to be consistent with that understanding. I don't know whether it goes beyond that or not, but I think you need to be able, a key element of this is you act consistently, not with your profit, but in accordance with the law, and that allows you to explain your actions to others and to show that you're submitting to a discipline other than your own profit. And that's what qualifies you as righteous.
That is a brilliant insight. Thank you for that. That cleared some things for me, and I would like to actually get everybody else's opinion about this, because you are actually managing yourself. I mean, again, this comes back to this idea that even if you're managing yourself to some standard, the idea of ritual in chapter 3 that we talked about so extensively, that you're managing yourself to that, at least that cultural norm, to some standard. And I think this idea is that if you're managing yourself to the law, that is what makes you a righteous person. I would love to hear if Mon or Jason have any kind of thoughts on that, because because it kind of, I even was looking at what we just read in number, I believe it was number 8, or no, where he would basically just, the superior man in the world does not set his mind and either for anything or against anything. What is right is he will follow. So it sounds like he's following his conscience in that particular instance, not necessarily following a law. I don't, am I misinterpreting that?
Well, I think everybody could be right, because
I like
it's
that
very
kind of
different
test.
than Western philosophy, and then at least my understanding. It's also my complaint to Confucius. You teach a lot, but you never give us clear definition, and only tell me this is right, this is wrong, and never give a clear and like Western, like Socrates, probably a Platonic dialogue, probably write the 200 pages just debating. It's this, it's not this. But one thing I'd like to point out is in the analog, a lot of time when Confucius talk about the righteousness, which is yi, or the benevolence, which is ren, or they put the two words together, they means the general virtue. They probably sometimes they don't mean specific action. They talk about a general virtue. So that's I'd like to point out.
Aman, would you like to add anything?
I just added the etymology of the word "yi" into the chat, and the two parts of the character are made up by the words for sheep and for I, which I think in a Western mind really might cause a few people to balk at the notion that this is what it means to be righteous, to make I a sheep, a follower. That would be our understanding of it. That is not what it connotes as much in the traditional Chinese. But it is kind of difficult to wrap your head around an idea like yi, because again, it's a little vague and it's polemic. It's being used in a very particular way. This is like us having a debate on freedom or having a debate on justice. We bring our own idea of it to the discussion. And Confucius certainly had his own idea as to what yi was, and he connects it very tightly to ren. The two seem to walk hand in hand throughout the text. But Jason's right. This refusal to offer definitions is probably one of the most galling aspects of Confucian, well, the Analects and Confucian reading to a lot of Western scholars, because it forces us into these deep dives to particular terms. This is one of the things I appreciated about Jason's consistency in retaining the original Chinese, because it becomes too easy to skew towards how the translation reads as the most sense to you. But then I believe it was Brian who was just asking about the idea of righteousness versus virtue. I mean, if we're being strictly holding one word to another, righteousness being yi and virtue was de, as in Dao De Jing. And so obviously they're not a discussion about the exact same thing. But to our Western minds, righteousness and virtue are intimately close. They obviously are as hand in glove as righteousness and ren are for Confucianism. So I'm not offering an answer. I'm just muddying the water a little bit and pointing out the idea, the text is more complicated than even at first blush. And it's partly because of things like this. Good evening, Will.
Yeah. Yes, good evening, Will is right. No, this is actually, it comes off as straightforward, the text, but as we've, dove into it a little bit more, it's far more complex than I first thought. Kevin, you've been very, very patient. I do want to come back and ask one quick question to Jason about utilitarianism aspect of this, but Kevin, you've been very patient, so please.
Yes, thank you, Joe. I'm going to 3 points. First one, I'm going to bring one vague one. It's hard to use a word-to-word translation. They have some order or hierarchy or even parallel. 仁义礼智信，温良恭俭让。 we learned some of them. Each book has some of the element. Also another one called 孝弟忠信仁义烈耻. All those, you know, like Jason bring out the benevolence and righteousness. That's one of maybe morality. It's far than that. We just, you know, maybe one day we do own homework, then we, you know, talk about this topic. That's first. Second, about the Ren. Is Ren is what is Ren? Two person, right? You see that person? That's Ren, same pronunciation with person. We call the person, another one called says in Chinese, oh, same pronunciation called them. It's very interesting. Why does the two person, one side use semantic, the pronunciation, another one is meaning two, as two person, you know, it's very interesting. Second one about, I want to make comment about the subject. Some Jason mentioned that some Chinese they use lots of no subject. My observation, my experience, like even from here, if no subject, which mean apply to yourself first. I am, for example, Meister said, I such. That means this I also can apply to yourself. I would prefer maybe use one instead, also makes sense. Which meaning, you know, someone or one, I'll prefer one. Also some basic contact, some word you see, this is for example, chapter 4:13. It's about one actually, it's about the princess, like, yeah, it's not one, this one change to be high level, like a minister or, you know, some kingdom, how do you manage your that level? So basic context, you know the subject. That's very interesting in Chinese, a basic conversation. That's mean if you only put you or specific person, especially we talk about morality, it's like only apply to me, this kind of people. Actually apply to all could be. That's my understanding. Thank you.
Thank you for adding that, Kevin. Very much appreciate that. So I have Brian, followed by, I believe, Mary.
So I have a question. I was really struck, I think it was Aman who said it, that Yi is associated more with Ren. It's, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but my understanding of it was that the righteousness was living in accordance with, or striving to live in accordance with Ren, and that's what loving kindness is, or kind of the way I understand that word. And and I just say that before he said that, my understanding was that the righteousness, the Yi, would align more with the propriety. And I'm just wondering, which I think is Li or law, and I'm wondering which is, does that merit any further comment? Because am I wrong or am I right? Are we both right? I'd like clarification on that.
Yeah, let me jump in on this. I think Brian are the lawyer, so that's why you're concerned. Okay, so let's put our righteousness, okay, with Ren, okay, that's benevolence. Okay, so these two combine together in Analect, or if you put these two together, almost I would say 90% means virtue in general meaning. If you see these two words together in general means general virtue, because that's a two different meaning if you talk about the content. Okay, but you put the two together, that means general virtue. And the righteous, and law, in Confucius' point of view, they are the same thing on the two sides. So if you are a 君子, or you should govern by righteousness, right? But governed by the ritual, okay, and not by law, but in a way you respect the law. So Confucius hardly talk about law. I think that in this book, it just talk a little bit. I think only, I don't remember how many times, but I don't think Confucius talk about law a lot. Usually he will talk about righteousness or talk about ritual, which is li and yi. So these two words put together become the law, but not based on the punishment, but by the respect. Okay. So I hope I make it clear, but later on we will get more clear, be clear, if we read more.
Yes, thank you. That does help a lot.
So next up, I actually have Madeline and Mike. I actually missed you by mistake. My utmost apologies to both of you. So Madeline, then Mike, and then we'll come to, I believe it was Mary after that. So forgive me for missing that a little bit earlier.
So you claim, Joe.
Oh, yeah. Well, I can get down on my knees.
So there were two things I was thinking. One is that perhaps the very vagueness as to the exact definition of terms is a reason for its enduring popularity. Because when you think about the 5 relationships, I'm sure that everyone who had the upper hand in those 5 relationships used the Analects of Confucius to say like, oh, well, here, I'm going to define Ren for you right now, or I'm going to define Li, or this is what Li means these days. So that if you were in the yang position instead of the yin position, the Analects could come in very handy about how you wanted to instruct a child or how a ruler wanted to rule his subjects. The other thing I was thinking was in verse 14, there were 2 statements in there that were fairly Taoist, and each one was followed by one that was very Confucianist. Jason, I was wondering if you could put that back up on the screen again.
Oh, sorry, wrong one. You see my private message again. So should be this one. Yeah. Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, okay. So 2 of these sentences I could easily see in the Tao Te Ching. I am not concerned that I have no position, and I am not concerned that my ability is not recognized. I could see the Tao saying something like, I am not concerned that I have no position. All things under heaven have a position, and I am one of the things under heaven. And I'm not concerned that my ability is not recognized. I know that I'm a piece of jade in a rough cloth, and I'm happy to eat dirt and pine needles. Whereas Confucius goes in a different direction. He wants to be worthy of the recognition. So he's more concerned with developing his abilities, kind of like a young professional maybe, or a student, someone who wants to succeed but feels that he has to have the basics in place first, rather than saying, you know what, I have the basics in place and to heck with everyone else if they don't recognize it.
It's very interesting. I very much liked how you actually just kind of rewrote that and made it Taoist on the fly. Very, very interesting indeed. Thank you, Madeline, for those comments. That was fantastic. That was fantastic.
Yeah, I just like to say.
Now I really regret not calling on you earlier.
Yeah, I think thank you, Madeline. I think that actually if you read things through, Confucius is not that far from Taoism. Okay, they are from the same source. You can read into that, because later the neo-Confucius, okay, 朱熹, okay, in the 13th century, kind of like, has a strong influence in today's understanding of Confucius.
Thank you, Mike, for your patience.
Hey, not at all, not at all. Thank you. So I just wanted to add something. When I was in college, I did a lot of reading about philosophers and stuff like that, and that's where I learned about Confucius and Mencius and all of those people. But what I can remember is that Confucius talks a lot about righteousness, right? And I'm going to put this in context in just 1 second. And then, Mencius picks up his work. And from what I recall is that, he spoke to a lot of leaders. And one of the reasons why he did that, he traveled and spoke to a lot of leaders, was because it was a time of war, right? And what is interesting to me from memory, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, he concluded that man was inherently righteous and humane. Now, for me, it was striking that he was able to come to that conclusion in a time of war. You cannot pluralize righteousness. So to me, righteous is something you attain ultimately. It cannot be pluralized. So what I gather from reading, these gentlemen, even though they both believe that men are inherently righteous, some of us aren't, because we lack virtue and moral. And it appears to me that in their writings, where they speak so eloquently about virtues, morals, is so we could find our place back to righteousness. So how do you define righteousness? You cannot define righteousness based on what I read from these gentlemen without clearly articulating virtues and morals. Because if you were to, if righteousness was an egg or was a container, and you break it open, you would find virtues, you'd find everything these gentlemen were teaching. You'd find righteousness, you'd find morals. That's really what I wanted to add. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you very much for adding it. There is a lot of ambiguity. Would Jason or Amon? I mean, I guess that was one of your complaints a little bit earlier again. But would Jason?
I'll let Mary talk, and then I'll have something to say before I sign off for the evening.
Okay, great. Okay, that would be great. So Mary, then we'll go to Amon. We'll come back to your comments, Mike. Thank you for your comments.
Thanks. Thank you. Again, I'm just kind of picking up a little bit as I listen, and I want to go back to my comment about the similarities to the Bible or Christianity. And what I'm seeing is how and I apologize if I'm misquoting the chapters that were read. When the law was mentioned, it made me think of how Jesus criticizes the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who are like adamant about following the law and all the laws to a T, but they're missing the ultimate law, which is the law of love, and how they miss the point of all the laws that they're following, and how he says he came to fulfill the laws, which are the 10 commandments, which then get broken down into like, I don't know how many hundreds of like other laws. And made me think of that. And I think righteousness in the Bible is also kind of intermingled with loving kindness and virtue. And though the word virtue is not used, righteousness is used a lot in the Old Testament. And then the lawmakers claim to be righteous because they follow the physical laws without the heart posture that's required to be like, I guess maybe a true member of God or like God's family. And I think one gentleman mentioned like how maybe one of the terms used means sheep or something. And again, I apologize if I misunderstood, but that also reminds me of something in the Bible where like Jesus says like, if we want to live righteously, we need to be like sheep and surrender to God, like to the highest will, which is love. And so that requires like meekness and humility as opposed to pompousness and righteousness. And I think that's it. Thank you.
That is an interesting perspective. That yes, obviously Jesus was not following laws. He was following his own code, or following the idea of virtue or love, his own way. And I'm like, I must admit, I'm a little bit confused as to what Confucius is asking us to really follow. So I'm going to let Aman make his comments and clarify it for me, so I have, for the rest of the Analects, that I know which way.
This is not going to clarify, but it might shed a little light.
I'll take a little.
So I'm going to put in a very complex etymology for the word sheep, because the word sheep is made up of 6 different components. And if you've delved into Chinese numerology, the numerical symbology, you start to see where the idea 1, 2, the lines that connect them together, the 8 being there, how those are references all the way back, way into the early times of China, to yin yang, to the bakwa, to the interconnectedness between all of those things. And on a practical level, I, for many years, had students who were preppers talking about, the end is coming, the end is nigh. And they'd say, have you bought gold? And I'd say, I'd always have the same reaction, which is, if you're not investing in sheep and are investing in gold, then you don't really believe in the end of the world, because a sheep is actually the most utilitarian thing you could possess. It's clothing, it's food, it's milk. All of those come from this one simple creature, which is why sheep herding has been so ubiquitous in throughout human history. They are the most utilizable of animals. They allow a communion with the world. They allow us fragile humans a vehicle by which to have a sustainable source of these basic needs: food, shelter, liquid. this is why the image of sheep is so important in the sort of ancient Chinese zeitgeist, and why it composes one half of the component of yi, or righteousness. Make yourself this useful. Make yourself this harmonious with the yin and yang of the universe, with the 8 triagrams of transformation. Then you are worthy, then you are righteous, then you are just. This is the concept, or the underlying sort of, what is the word I'm looking for? It's the subterranean cognitive processes that came to a term like yi by the time it was delivered into something like the Analects. And it's important to remember that the past has a past. The Analects had an ancient past they were looking to. They were as removed from the Sha and the Shang as we are from them, which that's a long time. So that gives millennia for things to accrue additional layers of meaning and nuance and ideas that may even be lost on the general user in the here and now, any more than most of us use the term get and don't think of that as ancient Viking language that's borrowed into English, but that's where we get the word get. And it, yeah, so not to delve too deeply into the linguistics, but there is something to this that I'm going to tie into something I believe it was James was saying earlier about this notion of reciprocity and how he saw it in the Analects in these chapters. Reciprocity as an idea is what kept Confucianism strictly from being a top-down dictatorial system. Not that it couldn't have been utilized that way, because it certainly was, but as a philosophical construct, it was not built in such a way, because this idea that whatever the position, you have a responsibility to the other. And therefore, that is what Ren, or that benevolence or human-heartedness is this recognition of that ultimate responsibility you have to other and not just yourself. The sheep is the exemplar of this, because they can give of themselves so much and yet still remain bountiful, useful, and necessary within a society. So part of where this idea of yi and ren sort of tie in is there, but also when Brian was talking about yi and li, or ritual, these are almost like Russian nesting dolls of interdimensional sizes, where you can set one within the other and it doesn't necessarily have to go in any particular order. There isn't one at the core that supersedes them all or is the antecedent for all of them. These things have to be developed together and through the practice of applying them. And only in lessons on that application can you really begin to embody it. It's kind of like, I can tell you how to ride a bicycle, but you can't learn to ride it until you actually ride. You can't learn ren and yi and shao until you start practicing ren and yi and shao. And so the lessons are important, because otherwise we don't even know what there is to be gotten. But it's meant to be there's a practicum at the end of this class, and it doles out over the course of your life. I don't know if that clarified anything for anyone, but I'm happy to put it out there for your consideration. Oh, 2 thumbs up,
Yes.
I'll take them, Brian.
Yes. No, it's
And
very, very clear.
if I disappear suddenly, it's not because I am bored of you all, but it's because I've said more than my fair share of an evening. It's great seeing you all. When I'm gone, I will see you next week.
Well, thank you, as always, for your comments, Aman. I mean, yes, all I could do is say thank you. I mean, you know, sometimes I could go on and on about it, but it's but yeah, I'll leave it at that. Your contributions are very much appreciated. So thank you. With that, Kevin, you had I believe let me check the queue here.
It's me.
Yeah, I think, yeah, Kevin, you had that's a tough act to follow though.
Yeah. Thank you, Joe, Armand, and I hope that Armand listen to me to criticize my view. I want to use some analyze this. For example, anyone could be take time, you know, from different way understand. From 411, if you use those aspects, when you value some something fit not a value virtue, then non-virtue going to come up too. So I might why not you can take both? Why you split is Zhongzi, the first person and a smaller person. So that's when you doing that, immediately come up which side you go. Normally people mixed. Even Zhongzi, can you guarantee every time you practice the high virtue, high righteousness? So it's practice good, but it's you cannot in one side if this person else is smaller person. This is another one. Maybe could be opposite is I point you small person, and I side point you not for small person too. Opposite point finger point each other, and use a different value system and a morality system, and also it's like here 就是的会行 the first surprise that this word I just hard to understand. It's order or law by so it's and a hui like in these days, even from that's one from personal side. Well, our practice actually we do both. We have a law, rules, and contract. We got a benefit for both sides. Another side is the tool, right? The tool soil ground compared to virtue. We practice both too. Rich people, they got rich first, which means property. They share their wealth sometimes, right? So another side, you got virtue. How if you don't have you have high virtue, but you can nothing now can share with help others. We consider you maybe okay, not high virtue. So it's very debatable, you know, each one, even for third. I can't keep going. Joe, I'm gonna leave you. You decide, you know, leave somebody else.
No,
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. About 13. Yes, 13, for example, it's if you can actually practice government with Li, so why not? Li is a little bit utopian, like it's good. I like it. It is. If everybody follows same thing, okay, we can do it. But practice is not happen. For now, as here's question, why not happen? Yeah. I'm going to pause here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin. Something that Brian actually had brought up that I would like to bring up again is that this is actually something that where it's not virtuous to act in your own self-interest. Is that accurate? I mean, Brian did mention that. I just wanted to, James.
Thanks. Yeah, I completely disagree that Confucius meant that in this particular saying. That was number 12, perhaps, the the man who acts with a constant view to his own advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I think when he says that someone has a constant view to his own advantage, he's talking about a self-interested person. And but he's not saying that the self-interested person is someone that needs to be called a witch or put in the slammer or anything like that. He's just saying that there's going to be people that regret that personally. They'll take it personally. They'll take it personally that someone is more advantaged than they are, and that they will it. That people are willfully advantaging themselves. So, and these people exist in the world. This idea of the evil capitalist, wringing his hands and oppressing his workers, and so there is this. It's a trope. I would call it a trope. But just because it's a trope doesn't mean that Confucius is condemning it. Confucius is just say there's wages to pay. The person who acts like this is going to pay the wages of being of receiving complaints. He's likely to receive complaints. He might get torts. He might have to spend a lot of days in courts, like I believe Donald Trump did. If some book I read about him is true. There's this there are kind of like the wages of sin, and I think that's what he's really talking about here. He's not making a specific statement that we need to put people with that are determinately self
Interesting.
that are just interested in their self advantage and self gain, that these people will be dealt with. I think there is a trope in Christianity that these people will be dealt with in heaven, right?
Right.
You turn the other cheek, kind of thing. And I think it's just a trope. It's just a general trope, and Confucius is definitely utilizing it here, but he's not saying that he has a special place in society for these people. He's just simply saying that these people will be talked about.
Jason, then Kevin, and then I do want to ask one more question about utilitarian.
Okay, okay. So at first, I'd like to. Today we have a lot of discussion on the contents of the connotation of righteousness or everything, and my answer, well, that's just my answer, is zero. Confucius has no clear definition on that, and I think Amman put in the right, very good example. Like, I can write a whole book about how to ride a bicycle, and you don't know how to ride a bicycle until you really bike it. So
yes.
this one caused some problem, because I think somebody mentioned, actually being practiced in this way, because the contents become very subjective, right? I can make a decision. So in other nice ways, based on your conscience. Okay. So I feel this one is right. My experience tell me this is right. So you just do it. I believe Confucius believe this way. It's obvious on your mind. But I think it has been heavily misused in Asian society. So I hope the people in the Western don't follow this mistake. That's my personal idea, so probably controversial. I think since it's a subject, and then in the Asian, the government try to impose this one to the children, impose his own standard to the citizen. The government try to impose the government standard, or the senior try to impose their own standard to the junior. So I think that's a heavily misunderstood Confucius teaching. That's why when I translate, I very carefully look at the situation, at what situation Confucius is talking. If you pay attention, all the listener, except the book 4, because there's no listener, most of all the listener are their disciple. And who are they disciple? They are not farmer. They are not the young kids. They are They are the men of later. What's their goal? They want to get a government job. So put this way, Confucius is teaching the person who is a potential prince, governor, the government officer, or future parent. So if you put this one in the situation, is what we are teaching is, that's why I think that's why Srinka asked me, like, how about to practice this one? I said, I never teach Confucius to my kids because I don't think that's teaching to the young people. That's teach to you as a parent, teach it to you as a government, not to the people, not to the children. That's my understanding, but which is probably against most of people learning Confucius. People say, hey, that's great. Xiao, that's the respect your parents. Let me teach my kids how to respect parents. But the situation is, when Confucius talk about this, he's talking about to the adult, okay? So basics, when you learn this, you have to think about, okay, do I call my parent? How many times I visit my parent, right? Not as your kids. Oh, you should follow Confucius, right? So that's what I learned in the Confucius teaching. And I believe most of people learn it, okay? Probably misunderstood, yeah.
Wow, great comments. Thank you for that, Jason. And I want to come back to something that you said, but Kevin, you're in the queue.
Yeah, I'll follow Jay. Thank you, Jason. I'm going to follow James about that sort of one. So each one has the chapter for 12. It's one, pursue the profit for self-interest, self-benefit, and going to complain. It's true. Here I would say, that's by nature. I would say when we have something happen, we have a different way to do it. Okay, I'm going to benefit myself, then benefit for others, then also. Here, also make something, make my own profit. Doesn't mean make other complain. It could complain, yeah, jealous. Why you take my job or take profit? So such. And another way, okay, if you use the practice or you do first, I have here space and opportunity. Joe, you do first. So if don't do it, I do it. So that's another way. However, how many people practice this way? That's basically Joe, to your question, going to utilization, right? So
Yeah, you too.
It's very here. And by the way, I'm gonna follow Jason. Don't not practice in the I'm not a totally agree actually. You follow other this book, you will see the point. When you see the point, that means you practice really. Like a kid, they got own judgment, combine all together from different view. They're going to make our own path. Lots of things like Joe, I'm not sure you notice that when we read this, you never think about this from your education, from your practice, from a neighbor. But here's, okay, that nice side of the world. Why are they doing this? By the way, this chapter we call it Li Ren. This guess Ren in neighborhood, right? That's benevolent. For example, in Taiwan, I guess they call it Li Zha, still called. Basically, neighbor leader. If any dispute or for the village or something, they call this lead. They going to solve the problem. You don't need to hire a lawyer and go to court. Maybe you're going to the prayer area in minutes, they're done. Also, they have one by the, if that's show filial piety. One elderly, they can solve the whole family problem. So very efficient. You may see that's not fair, not this. They have a good consideration. Everybody's respect. That's another practice. But in modern days, our Western culture and this globalization, we make the world flat. We practice this way, everything law. We know how expensive they are. Hire a lawyer. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. James.
I just thanks for all that wisdom. I just wanted to I just had this flashback when I was just a really small guy. I had my grandmother and my aunt were Jewish, and they used to and I just realized, you know, that they took me to Chinese restaurants and all the time. And Jason, I'm glad that you're laughing, because I was afraid you wouldn't like to hear this, because in Chinese restaurants, you always got a fortune cookie, and inside the fortune cookie, it would say what Confucius said. And it was either something terrible, or it was probably something pretty close to what he actually said. You know, some of them were actually not that, some of them were actually authentic, but there were the inauthentic ones too, as you know. So yeah, so it was just or joke ones, perhaps they were just meant to be jokes. So yeah, so that was the it just popped up into my mind that holy smokes, is it when you were talking? Yeah, I was exposed to Confucius when I was a child in these Chinese restaurants that my Jewish grandmother and aunt dragged me into, drinking the hot tea and all that. Chop suey, yeah. What's chop suey?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can try to read the Confucius said in the fortune cookie. Then we can have a meetup. Let's discuss. You know,
fortune cookie Confucius.
Yeah, you will meet your love in next 5 minutes. So Confucius says so.
Hosted by Srikant, right?
I'll bring it up to him.
And Confucius will tell you what's the lottery number. You know, they have the lottery number on that. So.
Yeah. Let me see if was there anybody else. James, I think you were last in the queue there. Would anybody else like to add to what we've covered here this evening? I want to actually go ahead and thank Jason and Aman for their explanations of the analytics. I think the last 20 to 30 minutes is, you know, I'm going to go back to listen to those comments, because I really feel like they'll provide some clarity for me going forward on how to understand the analytics. It's a much more ambiguous, much deeper work than I actually had been thinking about up until this point. So I very much appreciate those comments, and I think that they really helped clear quite a bit for me. Kevin, actually, go ahead.
Yeah, since got extra time, about 4:14. Every sentence can, but it's it's
14, you said?
14, the last one, right? With today, we're not concerned what you're praising. So not about who you are, it's what you do. That's make you different. Leaders normally, especially, that's one thing we think our campaign about a president or any election come up. We care about what they see first. Who going to do the fact check? Is that matters? Doesn't matter. After years, people forget. Then come up, make me same mistake, or so it's very interesting thing. It's overall for me. We really need to combine everything as much as many as possible. Think about when you do this, you could be lost that it's in the door, right? It's not everything okay. It got perfect. Perfect in your mind or in that theory or in very limited scope. If you think the bigger scope, bigger circle, it could be upside down. It could be like a luminant clock, right? Another, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, it seems like it would be number 14 would be political suicide, though.